This is Monocle on Fashion, a show on Monocle Radio offering exclusive insights and global perspectives on the fashion industry. I'm Natalie Theodosi, your host and Monocle's fashion director. This week, we are looking ahead to the Met Gala, which takes place every first Monday of May and celebrates the Costume Institute's spring exhibition. This year's theme turns a spotlight on Black dandyism, so I wanted to speak to Charlie Casely-Hayford, a menswear maverick who was personally involved in this year's exhibition. Charlie is the director of the London-based tailoring house Casey-Hayford, which he co-founded in 2009 with his late father, the renowned designer Joe Casey-Hayford. Joe Casey-Hayford first established his eponymous fashion house in 1984, combining Savile Row training with streetwear design elements. Casey-Hayford's disconstructed and somewhat subversive approach to tailoring perfectly chimed with the club kids era of the 1980s in London and established the brand as an international label well into the 90s. If you visit the Costume Institute's exhibition this summer, you will see many of Casey-Hayford's iconic designs. In our conversation, Charlie talks about the experience of digging into the archive to select pieces for the exhibition, many of which he hadn't looked at since his father's death in 2019. While Charlie describes his brand as understated elegance, he defines Black dandyism as amplified elegance, sartorial excellence used to make one's presence known in marginalized spaces. He discusses the importance of the exhibition, particularly at this moment in time, when a whole generation of Black designers are coming up and gaining recognition. We also discuss the journey the brand has been on in the years since Joey's death. As a stylist as well as a designer, Charlie has worked to establish Casey-Hayford as a tailoring house rather than a fashion brand, which works closely with its clients. The focus is on bringing out their client's identity and personal style, whilst maintaining the design duality his father established all those years ago, of tailoring and streetwear, classicism and modernity. Let's hear from Charlie Casely-Hayford.
We were initially approached to contribute some pieces from my dad's archive. I think some of the pieces are from before I was born, so it's been quite something kind of delving back. But actually, because a lot of his work is pre-internet, so much of his career and what he achieved is naturally documented, so it feels like a real honour. But I think also, rightly so, that he should contribute to the exhibition, so we're kind of very excited to see some of his pieces feature.
And like you say, it was an opportunity to go back and explore the archives and we organize it a little bit. Did you discover anything that you didn't know or that you revisited with kind of a fresh pair of eyes during the process of putting it together?
Yeah, our brand has evolved over the years, and I think since he passed away, my focus has been primarily on modern tailoring, and we've kind of done our best to honour what he started and build our own tailoring house. And I think, when I started working with him, it was much more fashion focused. And each season I would take the time to dive into the archives and pull out pieces that he'd maybe designed in, the mid-'80s or the early 90s, and then we'd revisit those. And it was a kind of wonderful process for me and him, actually, because I guess, I was looking at it from fresh eyes, and it was something that he might have designed 20, 25 years ago. So, I am still discovering new pieces, in answer to your question. But, a lot of the archive I've spent a lot of time with, and it actually is oddly one of the closest connections I still have to my dad, and so I kind of use it in quite a personal sense as well.
So having also his work displayed on such a kind of global platform must be really special. And I'm curious, what kind of pieces did the Met request? Was there a specific decade? Is there kind of a specific look that they were after from within the archive? Because I'm sure it's so vast and so varied in many ways.
Exactly, it is vast and varied. Actually, a number of the pieces that they have chosen are from a kind of clubbing era, and
that's interesting.
Yeah. But I think it's from a time when you would. Well, I guess people still do get dressed up to go clubbing, but what you wore was just such an important part of club culture. So a number of collections and pieces from the kind of mid-'80s were designed with that level of thinking. And yeah, there's a dandyism to it that is maybe not a conventional understanding of the word. But I think, what's so wonderful about this theme is its scope, and it's not singular or monolithic. And I think dandyism can be interpreted in a number of different ways.
I was going to ask you about that, actually, because it can have so many different interpretations. What is it to you when you think about dandyism, and especially black dandyism? How do you interpret it?
On a very personal level, I think I interpret black dandyism as a kind of reclaiming of identity, autonomy, self-expression. I generally describe our brand as understated elegance, but I think of dandyism as a kind of amplified elegance. I think more often than not, it's about a sartorial excellence used to make one's presence known in marginalized spaces, and allows the wearer to oscillate in a space where maybe their presence wasn't welcomed, and in doing that it invites the space to expand. And I think that's really exciting, and in terms of what the exhibition explores. When I think of my own relationship with clothing, and I generally have worn an unconventional but a suit nonetheless every day of my adult life, and I've never really given it a great deal of thought. And I think in us working on digging through the archives on this exhibition, it's made me kind of question why I gravitated towards the suit when I first started my career in this industry, and how I used it as a form of body armor and empowerment, and a number of other things.
It's interesting that you say, I think suits can be used as body armor even today, but as you were saying, especially in the past, it was a way for people to kind of stand their ground because they were marginalized, and to express an identity. And reading about the exhibition and Monica Miller's book, which was one of the references, I found it really interesting when she talks about black dandyism as a concept that's like dipped in juxtaposition in itself, because you're talking about colonialism and slavery and people being marginalized, but at the same time there's this sartorial excellence and people expressing themselves and kind of reclaiming their identity in a way. Is that kind of a key part and something that we need to embrace more, this kind of juxtapositions and the grey area?
Yeah, I think if you think of like Du Bois, my dad used to talk about this a lot, notion of double consciousness. And so think about it in terms of one sense of self versus the perception of oneself from the majority. And, they are often two disparate things. And you have this void between your understanding of who you are and what your identity means, and then how you are perceived within the wider society. And I think what dandyism stands to do quite often, or has done in the past, is kind of subvert traditional norms and question parameters that are built around what blackness means. And what I love about the clothing and its power is that you can break down those norms, and its power is something that I think is maybe often overlooked by the general public, but it's certainly something like I used to talk to my dad about on a daily basis. And I think actually the reason that we both kind of got into this game was not so much for our love of fashion, but for our deep interest in identity and how clothing can enhance, shape, change. You know, you can be who you want to be. And I think dandyism has a lot to do with that. You know, I think a lot of people might associate the word peacocking with dandyism, and I personally don't, because I think peacocking often is kind of immersed in aesthetics solely. Mm-hmm. Whereas when I think of the power of black dandies throughout the centuries, it's so much more than that. It's, you know, aesthetics almost secondary or tertiary. It's about the power that the clothing provides, or subverting ideals that others have created around your identity. And I think at every juncture of the dandy over the last few hundred years, those kind of ideas certainly come to the fore.
I'm also curious to hear what you think about kind of the timing of it all. Of course, it's a topic that's interesting to delve into any time, but why do you think Andrew Bolton and the Metropolitan Museum chose to do this now, and why does it feel quite relevant in the context of what's going on in the US, what's going on in the world?
You know, I think it's an extraordinary moment for black design and fashion and style, and a moment where our culture and creativity is not only visible, but it's celebrated. And I think where the last 5 years have, in very simplistic terms, been about creating spaces for black voices and identities. I think, you know, George Floyd was murdered on 25th of May 2020, and the Met Gala is on the 5th of May 2025. So it's quite, you know, a pivotal moment. And as we look at this kind of next chapter, I'd like to think that the focus has shifted, and that something as prevalent as the Met is helping the language around this topic change and evolve, and that it won't be considered, you know, an isolated chapter or a niche moment in time, but rather an essential part of the broader design style language. And, you know, I might be optimistic here, but I hope that the Met exhibition will go some way to pushing that agenda forward, and will expand the language in which people use to think about and perceive black fashion and style.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like, I think it's a great point that it needs to be a conversation that's ongoing and constantly evolving. And I mean, I remember last time you were here, we were speaking about some of the amazing initiatives that you've been working with your sister as well to support young black designers more in the UK. And do you find that the industry as a whole has continued to do that? Because it was a big topic of conversation post-2020, but, you know, the fashion industry tends to forget quite easily as well. So how, since that last conversation that we had, how have you found the broader fashion industry responding to the issues and to the need for support of designers from marginalized communities?
Yeah, there's certainly still momentum there, and that's, I guess, what I was alluding to earlier. I feel like we're on level one, and that's what I meant by carving out the space. And I think we're now at a point where we need to move on to the next level, and there needs to be an unapologetic affirmation of these identities and how they exist in these space on their own terms, most importantly. And to some extent, I do feel that that's happening. You know, if you take our small, not small, but something I can relate to, which is the British Fashion Council and the designers under that umbrella. And there's some really great talent coming through, and that has come through over the last few years, if not longer. And I was actually thinking on my way here, when my dad first started in the mid-'80s, he was the only prominent black designer for a number of years until Oswald came along. And he kind of had to create his own path because there was no one that he felt he could look up to that had trodden the same path as him. And, interestingly, when I started out in my early 20s, there wasn't, to my knowledge, actually another black menswear designer on the scene. So it's mad to think that kind of 30 years on,
across
that much
generations, hadn't
changed. But fortunately, in the last 5 years, there has been significant change, and I think these are some of the best talents that we have in the UK. So it's an exciting time. My fear, I guess, I'm so invested in the British fashion industry. I just feel like we have the best talent in the world, but we are very quick to promote the youth and brands that are just starting up. And then actually, when you get to the stage where it gets difficult, which is kind of beyond the 5-year mark, you tend to be forgotten. And actually, that's when a lot of these designers need the most help. And I think it's crucial that we can, as an ecosystem, help one another get to a stage where we are perceived as international brands and can challenge the likes of the other major fashion cities. It's kind of a fundamental problem we seem to have within the British fashion industry. It's something I think about personally a lot in terms of what I'm trying to achieve. And whilst my process is a lot slower, I think, than the kind of runway-led brands, I do kind of feel this sense of responsibility to try and build something permanent that will last. And, we're now a second-generation black-owned tailoring house, fashion brand, whatever you want to call it, and that's actually quite rare. So it's kind of not something that I think about lightly. It's, I feel like there's a responsibility there to create something that will last.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you make such a good point that we're always almost after the next young talent and the next big thing, and then forget people after they reach kind of a certain small level of maturity. But hopefully, I think shows like Black Dandyism that's opening now at the Met, or even the global exposure that something like the Met Gala is going to give these brands in the UK and beyond is going to be really productive and fruitful long term. I have to ask you a little bit about the Met Gala as well, because it takes such it's such a big part of the conversation, sometimes in the expense of the show.
Yes, absolutely.
How do you hope that the people attending and the brands also dressing them are going to interpret the theme and pay homage to the incredible designers that their work is being honored inside in the museum?
I imagine it's probably one of the most challenging themes of recent times, and a lot of designers and also talent on the red carpet I imagine have been finding it a struggle as to how to navigate the theme. But I think ultimately, anything that's going to come out of this is going to be positive. And the chatter that I've heard, there's some really kind of incredible moments that are going to happen next month. And it feels like also an exciting time for maybe designers who haven't necessarily had the platform or opportunity to shine on, for what I consider to be probably, alongside the Oscars, the biggest red carpet moment of the year. So I think it will do a lot for, what I was talking about earlier. Grace Wells-Bonner is a good example where, she's one of the best talents we have. And firstly, to have her on the committee is, and rightly so, is amazing. But I think she's going to do some incredible things on the red carpet. So yeah, it's an exciting moment. We're working on a few little things as well on our side.
I'm sure that was going to be my next question. I can't help myself. Where are you going, and do you know what you'll be wearing?
So we are working on an outfit for the red carpet for someone. We've just decided to focus on one person and do what we do best. So, yeah, it's an exciting moment for us.
I think that's a great segue. You mentioned it a little bit at the beginning that you've evolved the brand over the years away from kind of the runway focus and fashion to being more of a tailoring house. And I mean, you're preparing something for the red carpet at the Met Gala, but that level of bespoke experience is what a lot of your clients can walk into the store and receive, which is not as common. So tell me about that switch and why it feels more right for you to do that.
Yeah, so I think a common misconception is that when I was designing with my father, the brand has always been about duality and high culture and low culture, elements of streetwear combined with tailoring, and everyone I think always assumed that I was bringing the modernity and then his world was the classicism and craft of tailoring, but actually it was the other way around, and quite often I was having to try and pull him back because he's just so forward thinking in his design, and I guess I really embraced that area of design. And I think also I was conscious that my dad had done something truly unique in his time on this planet and had created a design language that I didn't really want to try and replicate or attempt to build on. I felt like that was his thing, and I respect that. And my challenge, and I guess my reason to continue, has been how I build the brand after his death. And I felt that focusing on tailoring was a way to honour what he had started, but without necessarily treading on his toes. And it's an area I feel comfortable in, and that I feel like we have something very unique to say. And the tailoring world is actually relatively small, and being progressive within tailoring, it's all about the detail. And I love that, and he loved that. And so I guess I've been trying since he passed away to kind of evolve and carve out this new world for us. And it's been a wonderful journey. I think I'm also a lot happier because I love the personalization of working with someone around their identity and creating something that is completely custom to them. It's just such a wonderful experience and a collaboration. And I think it also enhances the currency of clothing, which I fear is often diminished by the transiency and speed of fashion day to day.
And you get to know people on quite an intimate level,
Absolutely.
right? I know that a lot of colleagues all around Midori House love coming to you for special occasions. So tell me about that sort of human aspect of the job and working with people so closely.
Yeah, well, I'd like to think we're very good at what we do, and there are a lot of tailoring houses on Savile Row that I really respect, and they do their thing. And I think with a number of them, they have an aesthetic, and then you come in and you get that look. And what we strive to do is we have a house aesthetic, but we work with the individual. We try and enhance them in the best way we see fit. And so, every day is like a new beginning. And I think my team, they're all trained traditionally and have come from Savile Row, but also have a fashion background. And I think a lot of our clients enjoy that process, that they know that they can get something that has is steeped in history and an understanding of craft, but if they want to hit the switch, there's levels of modernity there that they won't get elsewhere. And we can move seamlessly between both worlds. And I think it's done in a way that I'd like to think doesn't feel incongruous with the traditions of tailoring. So we kind of carved out quite a unique handwriting in that sense. And I think that's why we attract such a kind of dynamic and interesting clientele. And yeah, I love it. I love doing runway shows as well, and going to Paris, and the speed at which we work, and we made all of our collections in Japan, and yeah, I love the momentum of it. I think this idea of slow fashion appeals more to me, and it appeals more to our clients. And I think also, as I mentioned earlier, the currency of clothing is really important to me, and was to my dad. And I want at least our clients to connect more with their clothing and feel like it means something to them. And so they treat it with more respect, and then you have to buy fewer clothes. And for me, that's a much more enjoyable way to live.
And I love what you say about progressive or modern tailoring, which is something that you've really become known for, and it marries like both classicism and those smaller details that make all the difference. What is it you find that creates a progressive kind of suit versus a very classical one? Is it a silhouette? Is it a color? How do you do it, basically?
I don't think it's one thing. What I will say is we don't try and create modern concepts just for the sake of it. It's not designed for design's sake. We're constantly problem solving, and that was something that I wasn't necessarily able to do when I was just in a studio with my dad and our team, because I wasn't connecting deeply with our customers, with our clients. What's been so wonderful about this process and how we hope to grow is that through our interactions, we problem solve. And that's where the modernity comes from. It's how you enhance someone's sense of self, or, there are a multitude of reasons why people come to us and ways that people want to feel when they put on our clothes. Empowered, I'd like to think, is unanimous across the board. But what we try and do with our design is think how to achieve that feeling through clothing. So it might be that, sexy is a dirty word in menswear, because a lot of guys are just scared of using that word. But I think, fundamentally, a lot of men do want to feel and look good. And sexy isn't a word necessarily that would come to the front of mind instantly.
Why do you think there's such a kind of fear of that?
There's just like a stigma around it. But, when you do, and we do, with our consultations with our clients, we take a lot longer than probably your average tailoring house would, because we really like to understand and get to the bottom. And quite often, guys don't necessarily know what they want. And so it's myself and my team's job to help kind of guide them and extract maybe information they're not aware of. And, I'm not saying every guy wants to be sexy, but it is definitely a common theme that we find amongst our clients, where they're kind of unaware that that's what they're trying to achieve. And also I think, sexiness isn't a monolithic term. It doesn't, you could want to feel sexy for yourself. You could want to feel sexy for other people around you. You could, there's a multitude of reasons why. And so we try and make sure that the experience and the end result is completely bespoke to each client, kind of, based on that.
And by speaking to all your clients and everyone in the industry, do you find that people's overall attitudes towards kind of wearing a suit has changed? I mean, the conversation is that it used to be a must-do, and now it's something that people actually choose to wear and have fun with it. I mean, you've been an advocate for many years and doing it in a more fun, modern way, but do you find that generally the menswear industry has evolved, the attitude of the customer has evolved, and tailoring is now kind of has different associations attached to it?
I think you'll always have the sartorial squad. So if you put them aside, because they will just always exist, and they are men who deeply care about clothing, and there's a respect of craft, and they just enjoy dressing and the way they look. And I think they will always keep traditional tailoring going. But aside from that, if you look at everyday suit wearers, as we all know, the pandemic completely turned things on its head. And from my perspective, what it did was subvert how the suit can be used. So where it was, more traditionally worn within the city or going to work, what happened was that another demographic adopted it and kind of appropriated it in a way that, if you think about a lot of what we call cultural signifiers over the years that have come to highlight, a good example is skinhead culture. And if you think about their uniform, it's an MA1 bomber jacket, which is a traditional military garment, 8 to 10 hole boots, which again are traditional. But so they've taken something that's establishment and made it anti-establishment. And for me, that's what happened with the suit post-pandemic, is that it was adopted by a demographic who had never had any attention of wearing something as formal, and they were wearing it in a very casual way. And so it broke down the parameters of what tailoring can be. And so within the everyday wardrobe, I think the suit moved from being this separate entity that you wear when you need to get dressed up, and then you have your normal clothes, to actually kind of seamlessly integrating into the everyday. And so that was a kind of seismic shift. It is very subtle, but actually meant a lot to menswear. And so suddenly you have guys walking around on the weekend or casually going for a drink, and they'll be in a suit, but they might just be wearing it in a very different way, or it might be a relaxed fit, or, you know, their own interpretations. But it's kind of like, for me, a really exciting moment if you look at the history of the suit, because it's been identical for the fundamentals for the last 200 years. So these shifts do mean something if you're, you know, really immersed in this world.
And if we look back, I loved when you mentioned kind of club culture and those items from your dad's archives, where it was a time when people really dressed up, and it was so important, like what you wore to go clubbing, to today where things are a little bit more casual. Are we kind of back towards feeling like more open to dressing up, to even embracing as a slither of dandyism? I don't think we could ever do that properly, but is there a shift happening? It seems like it sometimes when you look at the runways, but
I think there's a relevance on a number of levels to the timing of this exhibition. And as you kind of highlighted, I certainly think that is one of them. And there is, I think, a desire. But, you know, it's a strange time we're in because of globalization and the power of the internet. It's very hard to create an authentic subculture and the beliefs around the subculture. And, you know, if you think about the club culture era we were just talking about, there's an authenticity in the way the clothing was worn, what music you're listening to, what you were reading, it was all connected because it was one and the same. And the culture kind of informed the art forms of the time, and so how you dressed was a part of that. And I don't know if we necessarily have that now, because everything's so readily available that notion kind of becomes so homogenized. It's hard to create these cultural pockets. And so whilst there may be this desire to dress up and a level of dandyism, I guess it's just how we capture it and if it can evolve into something real and tangible.
That was Charlie Casely-Hayford, menswear designer and director of Casey-Hayford. You can see Joe Casey-Hayford's design at the Costume Institute's Spring 2025 exhibition, Superfine, Tailoring Black Style, from next Friday. And that's all for today's show. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned. We have more big interviews coming as of next week. Today's episode was produced and edited by Lily Austin. I'm Natalie Theodosi. Thank you so much for listening.